The Second World War was a conflict so vast and destructive that it affected almost everyone on Earth and shaped the world we live in today. How did this cataclysmic series of events begin? The war officially began on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. But it wasn't just a German-Polish war, it was a world war. Britain and France responded just 2 days later by declaring war on Germany on September 3rd. Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. Then, on December 7th, Germany's ally Japan spread the war across the Pacific Ocean by launching an attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. But which countries actually fought in the war? Germany, Japan, and Italy were the Axis powers. France, Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union were the Allied powers. China, which had been engaged in a war with Japan concurrently with World War II, is also sometimes counted among the Allied powers. The Allied powers were led by Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Joseph Stalin, Premier of the Soviet Union, Charles de Gaulle, leader of the French Resistance, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States. Due to Roosevelt's death, in the final days of the war, the United States was led by President Harry S. Truman. The Axis powers were led by a man whose name is now synonymous with evil, Adolf Hitler, the Chancellor of Nazi Germany. Along with Benito Mussolini, Prime Minister of Italy, and Hideki Tojo, Prime Minister of Japan. On June 3, 1942, the Battle of Midway began, and it was a big one. The battle lasted for 4 days and resulted in American forces destroying Japan's first-line carrier force. This is widely recognized as the point at which the Pacific front of the war turned against Japan. Meanwhile, the tides of war turned in Europe in February of 1943, when Germany met a decisive defeat at the hands of the Soviet Union at the Battle of Stalingrad. More than 1 million Soviet troops and tens of thousands of civilians died in this epic battle in defense of the city. However, the cost to Germany was the destruction of 2 entire armies and a failure to take Stalingrad. This defeat was the beginning of the end for Germany on the Eastern Front of the war. After more than 5 years of grueling conflict, World War II finally ground to a halt in 1945. The final stages of the war in Europe began with the Allied invasion of Normandy. D-Day, as it is known, was June 6, 1944. This invasion opened a second front in Europe. Germany made a final offensive push in the winter of 1944 and 1945 in the Ardennes, but this effort was a failure. With the Red Army advancing from the east, claiming territory for the Soviets, and American and British troops advancing through France from the west, the Allied forces converged on Berlin. Hitler committed suicide on April 30, 1945. The war in Europe officially ended days later, on May 8th. The war in the Pacific, however, kept grinding on into the summer. The American island-hopping campaign had taken a toll on Japanese installations in the Pacific. Firebombing campaigns killed hundreds of thousands of people in Japanese cities, and the sheer horror of the atomic bombs that struck Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, along with the threat of Soviet invasion, finally knocked Japan out of the war.
I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.